This is a story that we have been wanting to sort of dig into just a little bit more. There's a lot of angles to it, so we tried to get really narrow today and bring you something that maybe you haven't seen anywhere else. Let me start with a little bit of a setup. So the Minneapolis City Council is now calling for an independent audit after an incident on Tuesday in Minneapolis. It's been just sparking a lot of attention. So federal law enforcement say that they were executing a search warrant in a drug and money laundering case, and this was, they say, part of a bigger metro-wide investigation. ICE agents were there as part of it. The scene was described by some who were there as heavily militarized, and then some city leaders and others went on social media pretty early on, fearing that this was maybe an ICE raid because it is a heavily migrant corridor. A lot of people who live and work there are from other countries. So word is starting to spread. People are starting to sort of get nervous, panicked online. You can see it brewing, that something is happening in the neighborhood. Crowds start to form. Now, the scene was eventually cleared pretty soon thereafter. There were no arrests made. Since then, there's just been a war of words all week between one group over here. We've got the mayor, the police chief, the sheriff, and then this other group, which is some Minneapolis City Council members and some others who were on social media talking about this, them thinking this was potentially an immigration raid. Now, cut to yesterday, City Council has now voted for this independent review, specifically looking at how law enforcement handled that incident. For instance, did they follow protocol? Again, we wanted to kind of drill down on that aspect and kind of set aside the war of words and the back and forth. We want to talk about that law enforcement presence with somebody who knows a thing or two about this. So joining me now is Jim Hayes. He's a 20-year veteran of the Department of Homeland Security and current vice president at Guidepost Solutions. Thanks for joining us, Jim. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So let's talk about, you're familiar with what went down. You took a look at some videos, some photos there. Law enforcement telling us that scene Tuesday was the feds executing a search warrant for a drugs and money laundering case, part of a larger metro-wide investigation. As you take a look at that video through your eyes and your experience, I'm curious if you can walk us through what you're seeing, and we can play, I believe we have some of that video right now. Anything stand out to you, but explain to us what we're seeing here.
Well, one of the things that strikes me as the reporting is that this is a federal task force conducting a criminal investigation into a group of people that are alleged to be trafficking in drugs and laundering money. And when you talk about those types of investigations, they often involve violent gangs and dangerous individuals. And what looks to me to be happening here is this is either the Homeland Security Investigations Special Response Team or components, because there were other agencies there, the ATF and the FBI, components of their SWAT teams. And these are teams of highly skilled investigators, special agents who are called upon to execute high-risk search and arrest warrants. These are criminal investigative operations, and standard for these types of cases when you're looking at tackling dangerous, violent criminal organizations.
Jim, how about the tanks? I mean, visually, as you're looking at this, is not something we see, around these parts very often. So it's very startling on any day. But now we're in a neighborhood where it's, a heavily immigrant population is living and working there, obviously outside of a Mexican restaurant. What about kind of the visual, the optics here?
This is rare to see anywhere because these types of operations don't take place on a daily basis. So I understand that people would say, wow, we haven't seen that. But one of the things to consider here is why they use that type of vehicle is to not just protect the agents who are executing those search warrants, but also to protect the general public, right? To wall off that area. Their goal isn't to be surrounded by hundreds of protesters as they conduct these operations. Their goal is to do this as quickly and as safely as possible, move into the area, execute their warrant, and get out of the area. So the bystanders complicate this in a number of different ways, make it unsafe for the agents and officers, make it unsafe for the people who are inside the premises, but also make it unsafe for themselves.
Was there, and you clearly aren't involved in this particular response or operation, but generally speaking, are there opportunities along the way when they're strategizing this kind of operation to say things like, okay, let's look at the climate right now. Let's look at what's happening in the world and kind of the fears out there. Let's look at, time of day, middle of the afternoon in this particular neighborhood, which we know, is a neighborhood where there's a lot of people from other countries who live there. So is any of that taken into consideration, or is it the kind of operation where you're just like, these are the things we need to do, boom, we got to go, and there's no wiggle room?
All of those things are taken into consideration when planning. In fact, when they're planning these types of operations, they're looking at doing it at a time where they can achieve their goals, but also do it again as safely as possible. I can't speak to what that area is like normally, but those things are absolutely taken into consideration.
Mm-hmm. And so just to kind of circle back for a second, just to be clear, you're saying that what you're seeing, as far as you're concerned, looks like what you would have done maybe in that situation, or what is considered sort of a normal operation.
I've led dozens of those types of operations where the target of the investigation is a potentially dangerous target, and you need to take particular care for the risk associated with what you're trying to achieve.
Okay. I think there were some questions from some folks about, well, it would have been nice to have been given a heads up if you're, a city official or something like that. Is there any room for that, for any sort of advance notice for anybody?
I can speak with firsthand knowledge that ICE and the Department of Homeland Security really desperately want to cooperate and want to have that coordination with localities. And this is why you've seen the Secretary, the Attorney General, and the Border Czar go out and talk publicly about sanctuary jurisdictions and target those jurisdictions in court because of the challenge of conducting these activities when you're not able to cooperate. History has shown, though, that in certain jurisdictions, and there have been these jurisdictions throughout Minnesota, if you cooperate, if you provide advance notice, then it's highly likely that that information is going to be relayed to the public in a way that makes it very difficult to actually achieve the objectives of making those neighborhoods safer by removing those dangerous organizations.
Yeah, and I guess we can talk about that for a second too. The fact that it started to spread on social media. Some speculation early on. When it in this age of social media, when it gets out there, and then we saw the crowd starting to form. What obviously there seems to be some sort of a compromise potentially to the operation, but also the people involved as well on both sides of things. Also the bystanders.
Like I said, this is not a situation where Homeland Security, the FBI, ATF, anyone wants to invite people to witness these types of activities for a number of reasons, but most importantly, for the safety and security of those people who are bystanders. I don't know who the people are that are glued to social media all day long and see a report that there is some type of arrest or warrant operation being conducted, and the first thing they do is they race down there with their phones or their cameras. I just don't know who has that kind of time, but it's certainly unwarranted, and it's certainly something that, if possible, the department and these agencies would like to dissuade people from doing that.
And you say that, and the crowds were forming, and there's just one piece of video that I remember seeing where one of the law enforcement agents had someone coming up to him with a cell phone and was trying to record, and got fairly close, maybe a foot or so in front of him, and then the agent sort of pushed him off. What are the boundaries when it comes to what are the law enforcement agents able to do in order to sort of keep things secure, but also as maybe a journalist, somebody trying to get video, they also have rights as well. What's that balance?
The agents have an obligation to, again, protect the integrity of their law enforcement operation, protect the integrity of the scene, and make sure that these people who, again, have no idea what's going on, right? They're just seeing a report, showing up, don't know if there's been some type of violent incident inside, and that's the reason for the agent's presence, or if this is a standard, again, investigative operation. So that's their first obligation. Secondary is to try and keep all of those people safe. And really, they don't want to do anything. They don't want to have to push people away. They don't want to, as they have had to do in certain circumstances, take people into custody because they're interfering with these law enforcement operations. So it's a very difficult situation for law enforcement when they're trying to achieve the objective of keeping that community safe, and that community comes out and wants to interfere with their ability to do so.
Yeah, and it's tricky. It's tricky, especially here in Minneapolis, where 5 years ago we had a bystander who was able to get video, watching the death of George Floyd at the hands of a Minneapolis police officer. So you understand, from that perspective, people, I think, just in general, since then, not just here in Minneapolis, but everywhere, have felt this sense of distrust of law enforcement and have felt like we can't even trust what they're telling us. So I need to actually show people what actually, happened. I'm sure you dealt with that during your career as well.
I've never worked in a jurisdiction with as complicated a situation as you described from that incident. And certainly, I know that the agencies want to build that trust back. When you have situations where the politicians are against law enforcement, just en masse, because of something that happened in the past, when you have situations where the community has then turned, I understand that it's a very difficult situation there on both sides, and would love nothing more, as the department would, to have some type of cooperation exist.
Okay. Before I let you go, I do want to just ask you a little bit more of a broader question that sort of relates to this. There was a letter that was written, I believe, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, by about 19 high-level sort of investigative ICE agents. And you were saying maybe back in 2018 this was written, but they wrote a letter to Homeland Security requesting essentially that ICE as an agency be separated and spun off from Homeland Security because they were finding there were a lot of obstacles to getting some of the other work done that they do. Can you kind of give us a glimpse into some of the other types of investigations they would do, and the issues that they're running into, particularly then and obviously now as well?
Well, ICE has a very diverse mission. More than 400 federal statutes can be enforced by immigration and customs enforcement agents. Everything from transnational criminal gang activity, narcotics activity, money laundering activity, the reasons why this activity or this investigation was taking place, to child exploitation, smuggling of counterfeit goods. So there's a lot of different things that the agency has authority over. And since its inception after the 9/11 attacks, this agency has really been governed in terms of what's most important, the priorities, based on how the presidential administration feels about immigration enforcement. And so where there's a administration that does not feel that that's a top priority, these agents spend their time investigating all sorts of other types of criminal activity. When the administration, as it is now, feels that immigration enforcement is the top priority, all those things become secondary. And I understand that a lot of those people in the agency believe that all of the different things they focus on are the most important things. Those are absolutely valid feelings. But the reality is the agenda, the priorities are set by the presidential administration. And personally, in my opinion, I don't think you're ever going to see a situation where one component of the agency splits off on its own.
Okay. Jim, one more here really quickly. I just wanted to circle back just to kind of close the loop here on Tuesday's incident in Minneapolis. So the city council has called for this independent investigation, which it sounds like it's going to happen by the Office of the Auditor in Minneapolis. So what will they be looking for? And if you were that independent auditor, I mean, what do you come away with? Was anything done incorrectly that day?
From the video that I've seen, no. In terms of what they're going to be able to accomplish, I think they're going to be looking mostly to the sheriff's department, the police department, to try and understand what their role was, what their role generally is. And I think across the country, certainly when I was in charge of the ICE offices in Los Angeles and New York City, our relationships with the local police departments and sheriff's departments, when it came to conducting criminal investigations, was paramount. We needed them and they needed us. So I hope that those law enforcement officials make that clear, that when it comes to investigating criminal threats, they play a role, and they should be allowed to play that role for the sake of the communities that they represent.
All right, Jim, we really appreciate your time and your insight as somebody who spent 20 years in this world. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, take care. All right, Jim Hayes there for us, a former Homeland Security veteran for 20 years. Again, yeah, we, it's tricky. How do you continue to cover that story because there's so many different aspects to it, and we just tried to separate some of the emotional stuff, which is important too, but just tried to separate that out and just take a look at this one piece of it. So.